Either one of these images, a yo-yo or a spool of thread, can accurately represent life. We've all experienced, though, as that spool unwinds, the knots and the tangles. So throughout the history of the people of God, we have recorded for us, especially in the Old Testament, a dynamic in their faith that was full of tangles and knots. They had hope. Ever since Adam and Eve rebelled against God in the garden, and God walked with them in the cool of the evening and confronts them, he says to them, someday somebody will come who will crush the head of the serpent. So from the very beginning of our rebellion against God, there has been hope. But as that string has unwound over time, the knots and the tangles seem to be becoming bigger and bigger and more significant and distracting, and harder for us to see how that thread is continuing into the future so we can have hope. Throughout human history, we have lived in a state of perpetual conflict between tribes or nations. I did a little research this week. There has not been a period of human history where there's not been a significant conflict between tribes or nations. Right now, today, there are at least 50 international conflicts that have a duration of 20 years or more. 15 of them have been going on for longer than I've been alive. 3 of them are more than 100 years old. Life is full of knots and tangles. And the ancient people of God understood that because their line, their thread as it unspooled, being full of knots and tangles, for 400 years they were in oppression under Egypt. For 40 years they wandered in the wilderness, and then from the time of Solomon to the time of Christ, about 900 years, they were divided by civil war and run over by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and later on the Persians. They were ready for something new. Our world is ready for something new. And now in this in-between, whatever this week is called, whether this is Tweenmas or Twixtmas or whatever, between Christmas and New Year's, we've had the great hope of the Savior. We are going to have great hope of a Happy New Year and all the resolutions. So this is a week of anticipation, but it's the same spool of string that's unwinding into 2026. It's not like every year we get a new spool, a fresh spool that we can begin unwinding. And we can be that much more careful to make sure it's unwound properly. It doesn't work that way. It's the same spool. So what is our source of hope? How do we, especially as those who worship the Creator God, how do we nurture hope? Because according to Peter, living hopefully is a significant dynamic that marks us as followers of Jesus. And people will ask, especially when they live in desperate times, when they're knots, when the string of their life is knotted and tangled, what is the source of your hope? Not that we live perfectly or our faith makes all problems go away, but we know it's normal to have tangles in the string, and yet we know that string is going to eventually unwind and something will be at the end of it, and therefore we have hope. So hope for the ancient people of God was an important part of the prophetic message. Part of it was to inspire them, to remind them, return to God, be faithful to Him, because they had abandoned Him. But God also wanted them, the prophets, to proclaim, but there will be a future hope for you. And I want to look at some of those hope passages, primarily in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And although these are not promises written to us, Jeremiah and Ezekiel were writing to a generation of worshipers of God. Well, most of the people were worshipers of God. The majority were idolatrous. They worshiped God and others. But this is written not just to them, but to that faithful core, to remind them of God's faithfulness. So while these are not promises that we can claim today, they do reveal the nature and character of God, and they do reveal that there is a hope that will include us, part of which is being realized now. So Jeremiah and Ezekiel, writing to the community of faith right before the Assyrians come and take the northern kingdom into captivity, and before the Babylonians come and take the southern kingdom into captivity, before Israel goes through yet another round of oppression like they were under the Egyptians and like the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. As Jeremiah and Ezekiel speak of hope, they're not speaking merely of optimism, that it's okay because we will untangle the knots. Rather, they are reflecting and reminding the people of God, their listeners, that God's character has not changed. And although God is not giving blank checks to solve all their problems, there is a perspective, there is a way of thinking and understanding God's created order that allows that string to become unraveled, that while we don't understand and can't fix all the knots and tangles, we know it is being unraveled by a divine hand who will bring all things to its proper conclusion. So here are 4 texts of hope. I'm just going to read them, make a brief comment, and then we'll wrap this up. The first one is found in Ezekiel chapter 11. We're going to look at 2 from Ezekiel and a couple from Jeremiah. And as Ezekiel writes in chapter 11, the language that he uses is repeated in chapter 30-something. I don't have it right here in front of me, 36. But there's a slight change in his language. We'll look at that. So let me read Ezekiel 11, starting at verse 17. Therefore say, so this is God saying to Ezekiel, here's the message I want you to preach. Thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. So he's already prophesied that because they had been unfaithful, they had worshiped other gods, just as Moses said would happen in the book of Deuteronomy. If they were unfaithful to God, God would scatter them amongst the nations. So now Ezekiel's saying, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you out of the countries where you've been scattered. I will give you the land of Israel. And when they come there, they will remove from it all its detestable things and all its abominations. So when they gather together, they are going to get rid of all of the idolatry. Let me just do a quick sidebar. There are a lot of perspectives on these kinds of prophetic statements about what is happening in the Middle East now. Is that the fulfillment of this text? For a variety of reasons, and we could argue and debate and discuss this for a long time. It's outside the realm of what we're going to do today. Let me just say, I don't think so. Not yet, but maybe the precursor to in the near future, maybe. So that's my definitive position on that theological question. And there are exegetical and hermeneutical and theological reasons why. But what isn't happening is they're not getting rid of the abominable things and the detestable things. That's why I don't think it's a literal. Anyway, we'll move on. This is still, my point is, this is still, I believe, future, millennial reign of Christ. And then I will give them, verse 19, then I will give them one heart, and a new spirit I will put within them. I will remove the heart of stone from their flesh and give them a heart of flesh, so that they may walk in my statutes and keep my rules and obey them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Emmanuel, God and man will dwell together. This is the hope for these people about to go into captivity. They don't fully understand what's going to happen. They're still thinking everything's good. God's going to save them one more time. But God is saying, no, the time has come because of your unfaithfulness. I will bring judgment on you. But even in the midst of that, I will not abandon you. And there is hope. Someday there will be a fundamental change. There will be a change in the reality in which you live, and not just in the external, but in the internal. I will put within you a new heart and a new spirit, and then you shall be my people, and I will be their God. And I think the precursor to this, let me back up. I believe the precursor to this is with Jesus' birth and his sinless life and his sacrificial death and his resurrection and the coming of the Holy Spirit and all that has happened to reconcile us back to God in his created order. That's the beginning of this new thing that is happening. Chapter 36. So this is chapter 11. Go ahead a little bit. Chapter 36. And there is a slight change in Ezekiel's language. Verse 26. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in all the statutes and to be careful to obey my rules. So it's instead of they, it's now you. And between chapter 11 and chapter 36 in Ezekiel's preaching, he's talked about how this transformational process will happen, part of which is living through the tangles and the knots in the spool of yarn that is going to be their captivity and their exile. And yet someday, look forward, because while some of you are going to go through that and you may not see the end of it, someday I will put within you this new spirit and a new heart. And that has begun with the work of Christ on the cross. And we still anticipate this, and we'll see it in its initial phases in the millennial reign of Christ and then in the new heavens and the new earth. So these are passages of hope written to a desperate people whose lives they didn't know, but their lives were just about to be totally entangled in knots. And the spool of thread or of yarn or string, whatever it is, was, even though it was unrolling, it was going to be chaotic. Contemporary to Ezekiel, another prophet, is Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 31, writing to basically the same people with very similar message, Jeremiah chapter 31. Behold, the days are coming, 31 verse 31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So we're getting a little bit more information, a new covenant. And what did Jesus say to his disciples when he had that Last Supper with them? This is the new covenant. That's why these texts are referring to something that has started now, but the culmination will not be until Jesus returns. Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them and I will write it on their hearts. There will be this transformational process, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Emmanuel, what we've just celebrated. So with the birth of Christ, we have not only hope for dealing with the reconciliation of God and forgiveness of sins and his sacrificial atonement and the demonstration of God's authority over all things with the resurrection, but we have the beginning of a new covenant, which Jesus said to his disciples, this is the beginning of that beautiful thing, this new covenant. And we have hope, even though it's going to be a tangled mess, we have hope. No longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sins no more. What greater hope is there than that? To be confident of reconciliation, and this to a group of people who are infamous for their idolatry and unfaithfulness to God. And the prophets in Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah and others, Habakkuk, are constantly preaching against the immorality that is so characteristic of the people of God. And this message of hope focuses on, I will forgive them and remember their sin no more, because of what Christ did on the cross. Then one more passage written by Jeremiah, and this is perhaps more familiar to us. And it is, I think, a great summary. We have to remember these truths. We have to remember the promise, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit, that you will be my people and I will be your God. that I will forgive. This is the theological background for this great statement written by Jeremiah. My endurance has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. Now, we're not going to stop there, but what kind of authenticity is that? To be able to say, I give up. I've received all these messages from God. I've preached them. Nobody's listening. I give up. Fortunately, though, he doesn't stop there. He's just being authentic about how he's struggling. Remember my afflictions and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. In other words, the burden is so oppressive that it's like I'm stooped over, but on the inside, my emotion, my heart, my soul is, I just can't take one more step. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. So even though I'm caught up and my feet are enmeshed in the knots and the tangles of this string that's being unrolled, to which someday there will be an end, but right now I'm caught in this, and I can't take one more step. My soul feels like it's going to break. I continue to have hope, not because of my circumstances, but because of the God who has authority over his created order in which my circumstances are happening. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will have hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. And that sometimes is the hardest thing to do. I'm a fixer. I like to fix things. I like to fix things around the house, sometimes with success, sometimes not. But I also like to fix problems. And it took me a long time. Sharon and I have been married for 38 years. And it took me 37 years, 6 months to figure this out. I still haven't figured it out. I can't fix all her problems as much as I want to. She'll come home and complain about a student. I got a solution for that. I can fix that. Give me 10 minutes with the parents. Problem solved. I can't fix everything. I want to. It's part of my DNA. I think it's just part of being human. We want to control and fix stuff. I can't untangle every knot. Sometimes, by making wise choices and righteous living, I can avoid some of them, but not always. Even with the best of intention and with a heart committed to honoring God, stuff happens and you get entangled. Your fault or not, it doesn't matter. And Jeremiah says, I almost lost all my hope, but I remember this. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I will hope in him because the Lord is good to those who wait for him. And I wish I knew where that spool was going to finally unravel. If God would tell me when that was going to happen, we could come up with a more effective strategic plan for Q50 Community Church. Even just give me a glimpse into the year 2026. But no, we wait for God. That's that expression of our dependence upon him, acknowledging his authority over all things as the ultimate, not just a fixer, but he's the one who's written the script. So for those ancient people, as they're about to go into an environment they don't fully understand, in fact, Habakkuk said, God told me these things and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. It was so contrary to their understanding of who God was and who they were as the people of God. They are given a message of hope. I will make a new covenant. I will give you a new spirit. I will be your God, and you will be my people. None of which is defined by their circumstances or even their contribution. It is purely the love and faithfulness of God. So hope for 2026, for the new, as we watch this string unravel, it sometimes feels out of control and we're trying to get our feet out from the knots and the tangles, our hope is based on this. One, the faithfulness of God. Because life is like that string that's being unraveled. It's not a yo-yo going up and down in ceaseless cycling. Even though there are knots and tangles, we do know there is an end. And that end is determined because of the sovereignty and authority of God. So we have hope for 2026 because God is faithful. That's not a cliche. I'm not trying to minimize the reality of what we may face in 2026, but we must be convinced that our God is a faithful God. Secondly, we have hope because God desires relationship. He will be our God and we will be His people. The relationship and the intimacy that existed in the garden is gone forever, but we do have a new kind of relationship through Christ, which even the people of the Old Testament, although they could pray and they could serve and there were things they could do, they still did not have that intimacy like we have it. So we have this new relationship because of Emmanuel. God is with us, and that brings us hope. It's a now but not yet kind of relationship, but it is real. And third, we have hope because God is renewing our hearts. I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them, Ezekiel said. I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you, as his focus comes down more to those who are faithful. They will be my God. They will be my people, and I will be their God. This is the source. This is the foundation for our hope as the spool unwinds. One last verse, or a couple of verses of hope, that sadly are either used to spawn more theological debates about the nature of Christ's second coming or at funerals. Unfortunately, neither was the intention of the Apostle John when he wrote these words, because these are words of hope. And I don't fully understand everything that these words talk about. Again, we can have a discussion about this someday and the nature of apocalyptic literature and how the theology dictates the chronology. We can talk about all those technical things, but we can also take this at face value as a message of hope. And then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. Where have we heard that? Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Where have we seen that? Emmanuel, God with us. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for all the former things have passed away. There will be tangles and knots in the rope, as in the string and the thread, the yarn, as it unspools. We know what it is to mourn, to cry, to have pain. But someday, those things will no longer exist because he will be our God and we will be his people. And he was seated on the throne, an image of God's authority over all things, and said, Behold, I am making all things new. That is our hope for 2026. We don't see how the spool is completely going to unroll, but God is making all things new. Write this down, he said, for this is trustworthy and true. This year, which is about to unfold, may contain the worst events and the worst personal tragedies and the worst discouragements we have ever known. The knots and the tangles are going to happen. God is still on his throne. Faith is not the same as optimism. We don't know if it's going to be a great year or not, but we do know that no matter how the spool of yarn unwinds, whatever the knots and tangles we may encounter, God is moving His creation and His created order from the beginning of that spool to the end of that spool to accomplish His purposes so we may know Him, so we may understand that He is our God and we are His people, and He will make all things new. This is trustworthy and true, and this is hope for 2026.